All right, part two of political parties, or part B as I've labeled them. The evolution of party organizations. So as organizations, American parties are there's not much there. They're decentralized and they're fragmented. There's not a hierarchical, despite what this pyramid looks like, there's not a hierarchical order of somebody at the top and everybody below, rank and file down to the bottom, towing the party line. There is an organization, but it's decentralized and fragmented. So we'll get more into that. We'll get into this pyramid a few slides down. So what was once the political party's main organization in America during the late 1800s through the beginning of the New Deal was party machines. Party machines. So what were party machines? This is the exact opposite. A party machine is the exact opposite of this decentralized, fragmented party that we've just discussed that we have now. So in the late 1800s up to the 1930s, parties were very organized. They were very structured. So a party machine was an organization that recruited its members by use of tangible incentives, such as jobs, money, government contracts, anything that they could dole out and therefore have some control over the member activities because they could hold that carrot out in front of them, and is characterized by a high degree of leadership and control over member activities. So in other words, when a mayor won when a candidate won the mayor's job, the government jobs that he or she would be able to give out are police officers, firefighters, trash collectors, anything related to city government. They would reward their supporters with those jobs. If somebody was a building contractor and supported them, they might reward them with government contracts to build roads or to build government buildings, things like this. So you see there's this structure, there's this toe the line. And then once those individuals got a position in government, whatever that position was, their real job, in a sense, yes, they did that job. If they were a police officer, they did that job. But their real job was to mobilize voters for elections and get out the vote at all levels. Because if they didn't win, and their individual no longer was mayor, and the opposing party's individual was mayor, they would all lose their job. And they didn't want that. So this idea of rewarding individuals is really known as the spoil system, and that's where you reward loyal party supporters with these government jobs and contracts, things like that. So once an individual was in a bureaucratic position, as I said, the real job of those workers was to get out the vote. They were aided by party ballots. So back in those days, there was something known as the party ballot, in which it would list all of a party's candidates, and all you had to do to vote for all those parties' candidates was check a box at the top. And in those days, the votes weren't cast in secret. And so if somebody votes against the party themselves knew about it. Furthermore, one of the things that would happen with these political machines is they would kind of serve as a welfare system. What I mean by that is, let's say that so you got these police officers walking the beat, and they know that Mrs. O'Leary, and I use an Irish name intentionally, because the Irish, when they came over, were poor. They know that Mrs. O'Leary doesn't have a turkey for her Thanksgiving dinner. What do? They make sure she gets a turkey. Then what does Mrs. O'Leary do? She realizes, oh, these people, the Democrats, have supported me. I'm going to vote for them in the next election. And so that was one of the ways that they got individuals to vote for them. They were really, in a sense, the first social welfare system in the United States with these political machines. Now, as we said, they ended around the 1930s when the New Deal came into place. There are a number of things that happened, and even happened before them, that caused that to end. Some of these were the progressive reforms. And so why do we get these progressive reforms that happen? So President James Garfield in 1881, he was president of the United States. He served only 4 months. He was shot by Charles J. Guiteau, who was a disgruntled office seeker, who President Garfield had denied a job. So this idea of the party machine that we see back here, it went all the way from mayor clear to president of the United States. So this guy, Charles Guiteau, he had helped President Garfield in his election. He thought he would be rewarded with a job, and he wasn't. One of the problems is there was only so many jobs to go around. So he wasn't awarded a job, and so consequently, he shot him in the back, shot President Garfield in the back, and Garfield died. And so because of this, Congress would eventually pass the Pendleton Act. And the Pendleton Act eliminated this political patronage that we've talked about back here, where you reward government, where you reward supporters with government contracts, government jobs. That's the patronage system right there, or a spoil system. So the Pendleton Act eliminates that. And now how do you reward the loyalty of someone who is supporting you? It's become much more difficult because all these government jobs are now replaced with what is known as a civil service system, where jobs are awarded by meeting nonpartisan job requirements. So they are merit-based rather than party discretion. So in other words, I, as a teacher, I don't get my job because I helped whoever win an election. I get my job because I have the credentials to do it and went through the application and interview process and was found to meet the needs of the college. That's how it works. High school, elementary school, same thing. You don't just lose your job. Police officers, firefighters don't just lose their job because all of a sudden the wrong individual is elected. So these progressive reforms help to eliminate this patronage, this spoil system, and change the fundamental landscape of parties where they were these political machines. And now that's going to make them much more, as we've described back here, where they're just decentralized, fragmented organizations that don't have much control over member activities. All right, so moving on. So today, what has partially filled the void left by the demise of the party machine is the county political organizations. So counties across the United States have political organizations, both Democrats, Republicans, independents to a lesser degree. And what do these county political organizations do? They help to get out the vote drives. They understand that, hey, if we're going to win, we need our voters and we need those who support us to vote for our people. They help distribute these campaign signs and literature, and they help candidates in state and local in any way they can, such as with computerized lists, detailed knowledge about voters, and the longer this goes on, the longer these computerized lists goes on, we're finding more out about individuals, and so they can target voters in such a way as they have never been able to. Now, you know my name is Christensen. You may not know it. My first name is Neil. A lot of people know me by Dan. I was in Utah and I saw this sign. It was after the election. It actually said LeVar, and I thought, oh, that's too cool. So it was after the election, so I picked one up and just put my name over it. So that's what that is all about. A legit sign, but I have modified it to say the least. All right. Party selection of candidates. All right, so party selection of candidates, how does that happen? There are a number of ways. So one of the things that has happened is we know there has been some development with how parties select candidates. It used to be that the party leaders, particularly in the days of these political machines, would sit in a sense in a back room, negotiate and talk among themselves as to who was the best individual for the job, and they would make an agreement among themselves, and that individual would be the party's nominee. We have moved away from that through this era of progressive reforms. People saw that as non-democratic, and obviously the United States being based on democracy, we just tend to favor that kind of approach. And so today, party candidates are chosen through a primary system where we, the voters, vote for them, and we, the voters, decide who we want our party's candidate to be for a particular office. So as I believe we've said before, in most elections, there are two elections. The first election is the primary election, where you are deciding who your party's nominee will be. And then once that nominee is chosen, they become then part of the general election, where you have the nominees from both parties and even from minor parties who are going against each other. So what do these primaries look like? There are a number of different types of primaries. So there's the closed primary, and what that means is only members of political parties may vote in that primary. So if you're a Democrat, you can only vote in the Democratic primary. You can't jump ship and vote in the Republican primary. And to me, this is really how it ought to be. If it's about the party selecting their candidate, who they want their candidate to be, it should be the party deciding, not other people. So that's what we mean here. Generally favored by party organizations, since they require that voters declare their party preference. So in other words, in some states, you don't have to be a member of a particular party to vote in that party's primary. But in a closed primary, states that have a closed primary, you do, because we want individuals from that party who are going to declare who they want their party nominee to be. In an open primary, any voter may vote for the candidate of their choice, regardless of their declared party. So if I'm a Republican and I want to vote for a Democrat as the to be the next president or the next senator of my state, I can do that. Here's the problem with that. This allows the opposing side. So we know, for example, in the 2024 election, we know Joe Biden is president of the United States. And this is almost always the case. When you have a president of the United States, there's almost no serious challenger to that individual winning their party's nominee. And so, does this allow the other side to, quote, raid the primary and of the Republicans in this case, and vote for the least favorable candidate? That is the criticism of open primaries, that they allow that. So that is problematic. You don't want to set up the other side for failure. So you can see why many people favor the closed primary because of that. Then there's the top two primary, which is interesting. This pits all candidates against each other regardless of party. And then the two candidates that get the most votes, they become the candidates in the general election. So this is usually done at the state level. It's used here in California. So right now what we got is Adam Schiff going for Senate to the Senate seat. Dianne Feinstein died, and they're going for the Senate seat to replace her. He was one of the top vote getters, and believe it or not, he spent millions of dollars. So the most likely Republican candidate would become the second top vote getter, Steve Garvey, who was a former Dodger, to beat out his, and Steve Garvey did. Because what Adam Schiff, the Democrat, didn't want the second most popular Democrat to run against him. He figured in a state like California, which is predominantly Democrat, about 65% or so, if a Republican gets in this top two list, he's going to become the next senator. And he is likely right. So that's what he was thinking by doing that. And that's what the top two primary is. All right, so the shape, we've got rid of the political machine. So what is the shape of modern political parties, this organization? So at the top, you have national conventions. Right here, party national convention, you see the arrows going this way, right? The problem with the national conventions is they meet only once every 4 years, and the reason they meet is to nominate a presidential candidate. Now, this is where the ultimate authority over the national party organization is. When the party meets, they may change their platform, add things to it, take things away from it. This, at the national convention, that is where that all goes down. And normally, the presidential candidate has a lot of say over what gets placed in that party convention. But believe it or not, states also have say in what gets placed in that convention. President, just as a single individual, has more say than any other person. So ultimate authority rests there. National committees are next. National committees, okay? So the National Committee manages party affairs between conventions, and it's made up of delegates from each state, and those delegates from those states select the time and place of the National Convention. So you have the National Party Convention, then you've got this National Committee that's really somewhere in between here, where you got the National Committee, and it's run by a chair, okay? The national chairman. The national chairman, so the National Committee manages affairs between conventions, but the national chair manages the day-to-day operations of the party and is elected by this National Committee. So you have all these people from all these states, they form the National Committee, and they hire a national chair to run the party between the conventions. Now, this individual is usually selected by the president and then ratified by the National Committee. That's what normally happens. So the president, again, has a lot of say in what happens there. Okay, the county committee, as we were saying earlier, this is the real workhorse of the party. They are the ones that go out there, do the get out the vote drive, monitor the fairness of elections. So you're going to really see a lot of this in the 2024 election. Trump, of course, thought he was cheated, and they're gonna have people at every precinct watching to make sure nothing happens. So this is the shape of the modern political party. You can see that there's not much there. Now the states also have committee chairs. There's a state party convention. There's precinct committee chairs at the county level, and that's how it works. Just not a whole lot there. The party in government. So which party controls the government has an impact on what happens and what they do. So the party in government is going to be able to have more control over what happens. Are they going to be able to put their campaign promises into effect, into action? So if you've won more seats in the House and in the Senate, you're going to have greater ability to put those campaign promises into effect. Presidents, believe it or not, often deliver on their policy promises. The articulated in the party platform is the party state policy goals. They usually, so going back, let's see, going back to, going back to right here. So the at these national conventions, the states come together. In addition to what the president wants, there's a lot of stuff that gets in the party platform from the states. And so the state gets articulated in that the party states goals, and the more individuals you can get in the government at the national level, in the House and in the Senate, the more likely it is that you are to get those articulated party platforms as policy. Now, is there a difference? Is there a difference in the party platform? You bet there is. You can take any one of these, and again, this comes straight out of your text. You can take any one of these and you can see abortion. Let's just look at abortion. I realize this is small. So this is the Republican side. We assert the sanctity of human life and affirm that the unborn child has a fundamental right to life which cannot be infringed. We support a human life amendment to the Constitution. On the Democratic side, we believe unequivocally that every woman should have the access to quality reproductive health care services, including safe and legal abortions, regardless of where she lives, how much she makes, or how she is insured. So you see the fundamental differences in these platforms that come out of this national convention. And you can go through and read that list on your own and just see they're almost diametrically opposed in many instances, particularly obviously on the areas that they've highlighted. All right, critical elections and realignment. A realignment is a lasting shift in the party allegiances within the electorate. So oftentimes, or throughout the United States history, it seems like there's been periods of party dominance. And when something happens, you may get a shift in the allegiance of the electorate. This is known as a realignment. So what causes realignments? This is when large segments of the population feel that their interests are not being met by the party that they've supported in the past, and so they shift their allegiance. The largest one are African Americans. So it was the Republicans who fought and won the Civil War against the South. And so after the Civil War, African Americans just overwhelmingly supported the Republican Party of Lincoln. This was the party that gave them their freedom. But as time moved on, particularly when the Great Depression hit, so now we're looking at 60 years later, the Great Depression hits, Hoover and the Republicans were of the attitude for everybody, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and get moving again. And it just wasn't working. The economy was so depressed. And African Americans were in such a position that they were kind of the last hired, first fired. So sorry, I got interrupted by a phone call. So the African Americans, they stopped supporting the Republican Party and switched to the Democratic Party because they felt that they weren't supported by the Republican Party. They were last hired, first fired, and so they were overwhelmingly out of work during the Great Depression. During the Great Depression, the unemployment rate was 25% for the United States as a whole, and so they were just really hurting, and so they switched and began voting for the Democratic Party. This became a realignment, and that shift has lasted to the present day. So a critical election is when that shift or realignment first occurs. So you had 1932 FDR voted into office, and African Americans have voted for him ever since. Now, there was talk in 1980 that there may have been a critical election because Ronald Reagan gets elected. He gets reelected. He gets in a landslide. He gets reelected in 1984 with another landslide, and so there's this talk. And then his vice president, George Bush the first, gets elected, and he is the first sitting vice president who was elected in 150 years. So there's this talk that there was a realignment. They called them Reagan Democrats, but the shift didn't last. So after 4 years, he gets voted out. Bill Clinton comes in. Then there is a shift back to the Republicans, and basically we've been doing ping pong with the Republicans and Democrats ever since. So you get Bush the second, then you get Obama, then you get Trump, now you get Biden, and it will be very interesting to see who's next here, or if there's a change or not. So was not a realigning election, even though there was talk of it, and that was because there was not a lasting shift in the electorate. All right, why does the United States have a two-party system? The real reason the United States has a two-party system and has remained a two-party system is because we have what are known as single-member districts. So a single-member district is a district in which only one official gets elected per district. It is a winner-take-all. Within a single, let me jump ahead and show you what I mean by this. So here's this slide. So if California with single member districts, this is what it looks like. We carve up this state and we say, okay, one person gets elected from this district 25, one from 41, one from 45, one from 51, one. And you can see down here in the Los Angeles area, there's all these small little districts. That's because these districts have to be roughly the same population number, same size as any other district. So only one person gets elected from each of those districts. So you look at this, it becomes a winner take all. And it is possible to win with a plurality, not even a majority. So a plurality is something that means simply the most, as opposed to a majority where you've got to have at least 50% plus even a little fraction. So the person who gets the most in one of these districts is going to be the office holder for whatever office they're going for. So if even let's say you've got a strong independent candidate and you've got Democrats and Republicans and a strong independent candidate going against each other, chances are, even with a strong independent candidate, the Republican or the Democrat is going to get more votes. They may not get a majority, but they're going to get more votes. And when they do that, since only one member is elected per district, they will become the candidate for that office. So you can see there with a single member district, it tends to push against minor parties because it's not likely that they're going to win the majority. Now, we don't have to do it that way. We could have what are called multiple member districts. So again, going back to this slide, in a multiple member district, the whole state would be the district. And so if, for instance, in the California legislature, you had 100 individuals in the California Senate, the top 100 vote getters, or strike that. So if there's 100 seats, each party would have a list of 100 candidates, and they would rank them in order of preference from 1 to 100. If a party were to get all the votes, then all those candidates would become members of the Senate. That's not going to happen. So each party lists all their candidates 1 through 100 in order of preference, and if the Republicans get 30% of the vote, then they would get 30% of the seats. If the Democrats got 65% of the votes, they would get 65% of the seats. If the Independents got 5% of the votes, they would get 5% of the seats. So that's with a multiple member district. So more than one candidate wins per district. So in many countries, that is how they do that. So it's known as proportional representation or a proportional electoral systems. So just like I said, parties advertise their party list by rank, and whatever percent of votes they get in the general elections, that's what percent of seats they will get in the legislature, or in our example, in the state of California, if we did a multiple member districts. But we don't. We don't do it. We do single member districts. Now, the one of the advantages, and maybe some of you may not think it's an advantage, but one of the advantages of this prevents fringe elements from taking office. Now, when I say fringe elements, am I suggesting that people on the edge are not deserving of representation? No, I'm not suggesting that. But we also don't want people on the edge having more representation than they deserve. And we'll get more into this when we get to the legislature. So just remember this. The way Hitler came to power was through multiple member districts. And that's what happened. We want to avoid that kind of thing. All right. So with single member districts versus multiple member districts, minor parties have an incentive to organize with multiple member districts because they know they can gain seats. Now, the threshold to gaining seats is usually at least 5%. So in our previous example, when I said the independents got 5% of the vote, they'd get 5% of the seats. What if they got 4% of the vote? They want to get a single seat. So some proportional systems try to limit that fringe element that I've just talked about from gaining office by having a threshold to get any seat in the legislature where you've got to have at least 5% of the vote. So that's how they try to mitigate that. It doesn't always work. So in California, if we were a proportional representation system, so this is the current breakdown. Democrats have 39 seats in the lower house, and Republicans have 14 seats. So Democrats have 74% of the seats, Republicans have 26% of the seats. Now, if you look at our states, how we voted, 60% of the voters voted Democrat, 34% voted Republican, and 6% voted independent. If we were a proportional representation system, instead of the Democrats having 39 seats, they would have 32. Instead of the Republicans having 14 seats, they would have 18 seats. And the independents would have 3. So you can see why some people would say, oh, well, proportional system is the way to go. The problem is, as I have suggested, those fringe elements come into play, and we really want to avoid having those fringe elements just skew things in a direction we don't want to go. And that'll make more sense when we get to Congress, how that works. All right, I hope this has been helpful. Particularly in answering those chapter questions you've got to do, and just in explaining it a little further. Remember, you can always email me, ask questions and all that kind of stuff. Thanks.